It's the 14th of the 4th, 2-4, and in today's F1 news, one Adrian Newey has questioned whether F1 is still the market leader when it comes to attracting talent. Racing News 365 reports that Newey thinks this is one of the unintended consequences from an otherwise well-intentioned cost cap. Lest we forget that pre-cost cap, some of these teams, mentioned no names, Mercedes and Ferrari, were spending upwards of $500 million a year. With F1's broader strategic goals in mind, sustainability and net zero by 2030, a cost cap of $145 million was instituted as at 2021. The only exceptions, of course, being the three top earners in the team and non-F1 related costs, whatever that means. Newey opines that I think the hidden danger in all of this cost cap stuff is that F1 used to be the biggest, highest paying industry for engineers. F1 therefore would always attract the best and brightest talent straight out of uni, but with cost cap having frozen, not rising in line with inflation, that is no longer the case. Equally, Newey continues, with our existing workforce, the churn is unsustainable. We're losing them to higher paying tech firms, think the likes of Google and Amazon. Newey's mission then, should he choose to accept it, is to attract and keep the best engineers in the world based upon their passion for the sport rather than the size of their salaries. And on the new rules and regulations designed solely with overtaking and closer competition in mind. Newey says that the ground effect cars were always going to suffer from a more complicated set of problems than versus the previous era's flat bottomed. Newey continues that under this cost cap set of regulations, if you start off on the wrong footing, it was always going to be more difficult to reverse your way out of problems. So ironically then, the rules that were designed to make things closer have quite possibly had the opposite effect. And if Max Verstappen and Red Bull's continuing dominance is what Newey was alluding to, then season to date has been a case in point. That with caveats, of course, that Ferrari are closer to Red Bull than they have been, having brought zero material upgrades season to date. Oof. And in an Autosport article, one Matt Summerfield speaks to this. Season to date, you can count Ferrari's developments on one hand. A small tweak to the rear suspension's upper wishbone, and adaptations to its beam wing arrangement. But critically, no new rear wing, unlike the other teams, to adopt for the different characteristics of the tracks that we've visited thus far. Interesting. That in terms of absolute speed, that Ferrari are so close to Red Bull without upgrades bodes well for the rest of the season. And with the Chinese Grand Prix less than 7 days away, Christian Horner speaks to this, concurring that Ferrari are very dangerous as a threat. Horner saying, unexpectedly, I think Ferrari were definitely competitive around Suzuka. Even more surprisingly, their race pace too. Going forward, Horner concludes, we expect them to be our closest competitor. Rumour has it then that Ferrari are putting all their eggs in the material upgrade basket, the first of which will debut at Imola. The F1 world waits with bated breath. And in other news, on the dilemma of Max Verstappen's dominance and what this means for F1 going forward, Alain Prost, four-time champion, has chimed in. Asked to reflect on Verstappen's dominance in the context of his rivalry with Senna, Prost said that, it's different. The fight between me and Ayrton was driven by the fact that we were teammates for 2 years. After that period when we were no longer teammates, our rivalry all but dissipated. And so, continued Prost, herein lies the difference. Prost says that today teams are organised a bit more number one and number two driver, especially like Max at Red Bull, for example. So still, I think it's a little bit different. But if you have a fight between 2 or 3 different teams, I think the value of the winning driver is still that little bit more. But it's always a difficult thing, that, because, for example, Max is one of the best drivers today, maybe the best, and you just have to accept that. But if you look at people's perception of Max's success, they think he's winning because he's got the fastest car. That's not good for Max, and it's a shame, really, because he's really part of their success. And in Prost's article with Sports Illustrated, he's also talked about Lewis Hamilton's motivation levels and that the move to Scuderia Ferrari could be a positive one. Prost says that I can understand his decision to move because when you're in a team like Mercedes and they haven't won for 2 years, at his age you'd say, okay, maybe I'll just try something else, something a bit different. If Ferrari can build a car and do well in 26, I think Lewis can get his motivation back. Oof. Speaking of the man from Stevenage, Lewis and George attended the GQ Creativity Awards, but this time not with George Russell, with George Lucas, the man who was so instrumental in inspiring Lewis Hamilton to come back after the 2021 fiasco. And on Lewis Hamilton and silly season, Mark Hughes of the race has kiboshed any rumour that Lewis and Alonso had been offered drives at Red Bull. Lest we forget that Christian Horner, team principal of Red Bull, had claimed that he'd had conversations with Lewis's dad, one Anthony Hamilton, ahead of the 2023 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Horner later clarified though that there had never been any serious talks, that sadly for Lewis there was never a seat at the Red Bull table. Writing in response to a fan tweet questioning Lewis, Leclerc and Alonso's appetite to race alongside Max Verstappen, Mark Hughes clarified that neither Leclerc, Alonso or Hamilton were ever offered a seat by Red Bull. Critically though, a person not mentioned in that rebuttal has a name, and his name is Lando Norris. And in other silly season news, Fernando Alonso, fresh off of his multi-year contract signing with his current team Aston Martin, has released a statement. In that statement he says, "This is the longest contract I've ever signed. I will be 45 or more and still racing." Lewis though will turn 40 in January, so at least then I won't be the only 40-year-old that you'll be able to talk about. And in other season news, the rumour mill is awash with news of Nico Hulkenberg, that he's having talks with more teams than just Haas. Asked on where he expects to end up next year, Hulkenberg responded, "Personally, I think it's a bit early to be having this conversation, but balls has started moving in different places." The Hulk continues, "I think it'll be an interesting couple of weeks ahead, but personally I'm in no big rush that I need to get it done tomorrow or something." For Hulkenberg, a move to Sauber, soon to become Audi, looks like the move most likely, especially since it's the worst kept secret among F1 aficionados that Ollie Behrman is a shoo-in for the Haas seat as early as 2025.